All right. I am recording. You are being recorded. Let's begin. Uh, let's start with anybody have moments from the week to share? All right. Well, nothing's popping to mind that is allowed. Um, then let's go on. Uh, I'm going to share my screen. With that, let's see. Share screen. All right. So here's our agenda for the day. I have a few sort of announcements, more administrative stuff to go over. Then we'll talk about the readings and the videos, primarily focus on the videos as a way of understanding and thinking about the readings, in particular the reading about the launch. We'll do a little discussion looking ahead to the anticipation part of this week's reading. And then we'll talk about what's coming up for homework. All right. So announcements. First of all, if you change your teaching plan, so you got some feedback from me this week by email, you got some feedback from each other. If you make a change in your plan, that change should be reflected in what you hand in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, you're going to hand in your plan, kind of the final version of your plan, as well as a reflection on your teaching of this plan. And in terms of the assessment of this, I only look at the final version of the plan, but that should be the result. Should be the plan that results from the feedback. I don't need to see what came before again. Get a thumbs up if that makes sense. Thumbs up, thumbs up. All right. Now, I think there was a little bit of confusion that up till now, basically the way I've had you guys respond to each other is to ask questions. And in the feedback, it's absolutely very reasonable to ask each other questions. I think one or two of you, when you gave feedback, asked like a question or two and that was it. And so my interpretation of that is you may have been getting what I'm looking for in feedback confused with the questions on other stuff. So when you give feedback, I'm looking for what did you see that was effective? What did you see that could be improved? And if you have any questions, that's great. I mean, it's great to start. If we start a conversation, that's fine. But I want to make it clear that there should be more than just a question or two when you're giving feedback, because we really want it. This is designed to be helpful for each other. And next week, actually, never mind. I'll put that off for now. So I'll leave that at that. Questions about kind of what I was looking for in the feedback for you to give each other. Okay. Something that I realized as we're approaching teaching experience number 1 is that I hadn't given you a picture of the major assignments in this class. I mean, it's laid out in the calendar on Blackboard, but that calendar on Blackboard gets really crowded and it's really small and it's kind of hard to see. So what I've done is created a more visual schedule of the major assignments in this class. And I've posted this to the instructor. It's not formatted very well. I've posted this to the instructor materials section of Blackboard. So it's up there. You can download it. I think it's going to be useful to you, but I want to fix that a bit. I wanted to just go over it briefly because I think this will help you plan ahead a bit, especially with these teaching experiences. All right. I'm going to let you look at that for a moment. My daughter's knocking on the door, and I don't think my son hears it. And I don't want her to sit out front for the next hour and a half. So I'll be right back. Thank you. Don't forget to get cat. All right, I apologize. So as I mentioned, can everybody, I'll just blow this up a little bit bigger. Whoa. There we go. As I mentioned last week, the 5 teaching assignments largely correspond to the parts of a lesson that we're kind of this template for a lesson that we're talking about. You're about to do the launch. The next 2, the teaching experience 2 and 3 are related to the exploration. The teaching experience 2 will be focusing on questions. Teaching experience 3 will be focusing on managing group work. Then we'll do one on discussion and one on assessment. What I wanted you to see, and this gets to why I think it's helpful to plan ahead, is what the modality is going to be of these. So the second line there, the launch, I'm expecting a whole class. For the second teaching experience, it can be, you can do a small group or it can be a whole class. You can do a small group within the whole class, or some of you may prefer to convene a small group outside of your class to do this. Either of those is fine for both the TE2 and the TE3. The discussion obviously will be whole class for TE4, and then TE5 is just with an individual student. For each of these, one way to approach the teaching experiences is to use the same task for each one. If you've done, now for many of you that won't make, for most of you that won't make sense because you're using a task this week that fits in with what you're doing this week, and by the time the next teaching experiences are coming up, you're going to want to do a different task. But some people have chosen tasks that are kind of outside their curriculum, to the side of the curriculum, and then can implement in different ways. So if you did the launch this week with one period, you could then pull out a small group from other periods for TE2 and 3 and do it in a different period to do the discussion for TE4. That's absolutely fine. If you want the same task for all of these, generally most of you will do different tasks. And all I ask is that once you know what your task is going to be for each of these, just send it to me. You don't have to wait for the pre-teaching plan to have to be posted. Send it to me ahead of time. I just want to look and make sure that you've got a high-level task, because this class is about implementing all what we do. You're not going to get anything out of it if you're doing a low-level task. So, the latest I will expect that is when your the draft of your pre-teaching plan is due, but you don't want to do a whole pre-teaching plan on a task and then have me say, this is a low-level task. Now most low-level tasks can be altered into a high-level task. So chances are if you do that, you won't have to start from scratch. But it's going to be to your advantage to check with me about your task as far in advance as possible as you can.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes, please.
If we teach different grades, do you want us to stick with one grade for all 5 assignments?
Not at all. I want you to do whatever's easiest, most helpful to you. So
Okay.
yeah, it can be different classes, different grades, different class. It doesn't matter. Other questions at this point? I've just been sort of pushing forward. All right. Yeah. Please don't hesitate to interrupt me with other questions. Well, I was talking about tasks. Yeah, I think that's it. Because our class is on Wednesday, and because I have you submit drafts of stuff, because I have you submit the videos on Monday and we do feedback. Let me go back. Because class is on Wednesday, and because you submit these pre-teaching plans Monday and get feedback Tuesday, Wednesday, it's generally going to be to your advantage to, if you can, do your teaching experiences on Thursday and Friday so that you can incorporate the feedback. I will, in general, try to get you feedback on your plans, like I did this week, which was Tuesday morning. I just got that out to you so that any of you who really were trying to get that out, trying to do your teaching on Wednesday or even later on Tuesday, you might at least get some of that. But when you're planning, Thursday and Friday will give you the benefit of the feedback that I wish we could extend this out more. It's just there's so much going on, and the semester goes by so fast that we have to get the teaching plans in on Monday, and then get your feedback and your teaching later that week. All right, so I focus a lot on the teaching experiences, and you can see the schedule on here. I hope that's going to be helpful. I'm going to talk briefly about the assignments. Before I do that, any questions on the teaching experiences? Okay. I will say one more thing. I'll probably reiterate this when we talk about homework, but so the videos should be posted by Monday morning. Then you'll watch your partner's video between Monday morning and 4:30 the day of the class and give them some feedback. There's going to be time in class to further discuss that, to talk to each other about what you saw and kind of respond to the initial stuff you post. The purpose of having you give each other feedback on the videos as well as talk about it, besides just the general intrinsic value of getting feedback from each other, is for you to be able to incorporate that other person's feedback as well as your own thoughts when you do your reflection. I will not comment on your video before you do your reflection. So this gives you one other perspective on what happened in your class that you can incorporate in your reflection. I'll give you, after you've reflected, then I'll come back and give comments on the whole thing. So when you do pre-teaching plans, I get your feedback very quickly because I want you to be able to incorporate it. But once you submit the actual video, you'll hear from me after you've reflected on it on your own. Questions about that? Okay. The assignments, the remaining assignments, 4, 5, and 6. 4 and 5 are fairly low impact assignments. Both of those you're going to do some mathematical tasks on your own in preparation, which I'm going to then use in our class discussion. That way we don't, it'll be as if it's sort of like these are, as if you were doing them in class, and then we'll talk about them to make some pedagogical points. But those will be fairly low impact. Assignment 6 is what's the word, kind of encapsulating assignment of the class. And what I want to do is share it with you. There it is. Because I think it's valuable for you to know what's coming, because everything we're doing can feed into this assignment. And so you can even, it'll save you some time as things come to be taking notes about this now. And essentially it's a statement of teaching philosophy. And it's the kind of thing, when I do this with pre-service teachers who are going to be applying for a job the next year, this is a major assignment. It's worth a big bunch of their grade because a lot of them end up submitting this when they apply for jobs. If you end up changing schools, you may have to submit something like this to your school as part of your application. So it's worth doing because you guys are all in schools right now. I don't make it as big a part of the class, but it's really worth thinking about. There's sort of value to it. And this can be a kind of a coherent essay, or you can answer each of these questions individually in a few paragraphs. I'm leaving that up to you. I'm not going to go through and read it to you. It's up and posted, but I want to give you the overview of what this is, because anything we do in this class, there are ways in which most of what we do, most of these readings can play into how you think about or talk about a teaching philosophy. So as you see answers to some of these questions for yourself and what we do, I recommend just taking some notes in a document that'll make it easier for you at the end of the semester when you have to do this assignment. So I wanted to bring this to your attention now. It's going to be worth looking over and reflecting on a bit so that you can work ahead a little bit on it. Questions about that? All right. Get rid of that. All right, so that's interpreting the idea of announcements fairly broadly, but that is what I want to go over. All right, let's spend a little time talking about the videos. So the primary reading of the week. I gave you the TTLP reading because I think there's real value in all of those questions. That gave you a sense. I think that's a great example of how to really thoroughly think through a lesson. It's especially valuable when people are planning collaboratively. It's just a nice tool. And it's something you can consider when you're doing, those are the kinds of questions you can consider when you're doing your lesson plans. But the focus of this week is on the launch and on the launch reading. So there were the reading gave you these 4 elements of an effective launch: the key contextual features, the mathematical ideas, developing a common language, and maintaining the cognitive demand. So sort of 3 positive things to do and 1 thing to be careful of. Don't lower the cognitive demand. And then I added my 5th, which is how you can get students engaged or interested in the central question of the lesson. In your comments, so what I'm going to do, we're not going to talk about all of this. In your comments, though, in the discussion, there was on the whole a consensus that to some extent or another, both videos did 1, 2, and 3. There was some conversation about how they did them. And in particular, actually, let me go back. So before I move on, does anybody want to speak to that consensus? So is there a dissenting opinion? Does somebody want to make a comment about how one of the videos may not have done one of these 3 as well as the other, or as well as you think they should? So before I move on, I want to give an opportunity to open up to anybody who has a comment on either how they develop the contextual features, how they develop the mathematical ideas, or how they developed a common language?
I think the exponent video, I'm not sure if it hit 3 as well as I would have liked to do a lesson on exponents. I think she like kind of brushed over the other ways that we name an exponent. I think it's like we raised this to a power of this, and didn't spend much time going over that as like a common language piece of it. That just kind of like that's one thing that I remember from the video, is that like I remember her like kind of rushing through that part pretty quickly about the language change from an exponent to a power, and like that language change, and I didn't think she like dove into it as deeply as it needed to go into. So.
Anyone like to add on, agree, disagree? I'll throw the question there. Is that a problem? I mean, not in this particular video, but sort of assuming that as a common language issue, if she sort of threw out this idea of this is an exponent, it's this to the power of this, can someone sort of rephrase what the issue might be there?
Well, I mean, the issue might be that like if students are unfamiliar with that word or that language, maybe she has like ELLs in her class, or students with special needs. Like if she needs to like break that down and do like a language lesson on it, she would need to. The issue is that if I don't know if students aren't familiar with that, like raising a power to, they could just get a little confused. So maybe pausing there and noting that it is another way to say this might be the issue.
Who in here has a substantial number of ELL people in their class? Kanusha, you do. And Jacob to some extent. Patrick, you as well.
Yeah, it's about 50% of the students. Can you hear it now or no? I just got these headphones. I don't know. Do they not work? Oh. Can you hear me now?
It's
Okay, is that better?
we can hear you. Yeah, it's better. So Patrick, maybe you can talk a little bit about the issues you see with this common language and developing vocabulary in your class. Your ELL, can you talk a little bit about what you tend to do in the class and what can happen when it doesn't go well?
Yeah, it's about the way we break it up. Like it's like 54% L's in my cohort. So it's a couple. One, I think, is like the confidence thing is so much. So some things I try to do is in math, like whether it's a lot of the conjugates are very similar, more so in geometry, but even in algebra, like a lot of words are very similar in Spanish as they are in English. And then also, I think it's like a confidence thing, and then it's just expanding their vocabulary. Because if they can feel confident knowing how to describe things, and I think that goes beyond L's, like even just in general, like it's very difficult to be precise in your language, especially in math class. In general, whether you're still learning English or not, like to be able to describe what you see is like a powerful thing in life, but it's difficult mathematically to do that. So I think one, it gives kids confidence who are still learning English. But two, it's like a difficult skill anyways, because like math language is like you have to be able to do it. Like if you want to talk about like what a mathematician does, like it's very precise language, which is difficult. And I think it's cognitively demanding too, to actually get kids to to figure out exactly how to write or to say exactly what they mean is like a good skill to have as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Kanushi, does this mirror your experience in your class?
Well, I'm 100% ELLs, right? So a lesson that hasn't been explicitly like tailored for them, kind of like with Patrick with 54%, like it isn't like that's not a lesson that I would be making. Like all my materials are translated like bilingual. So everything is in Spanish and English, and we use specific words as strategic points from which to teach English. So, I mean, like the purpose of my class is definitely like dual, to like be teaching math and teaching English, as it is, I'm sure, with Patrick's class as well, or any of these. But yeah, so I agree with some of the things he said. Yeah.
So do you also spend a lot of explicit time at the beginning of lessons just pulling out vocabulary and talking about them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's about mirrors every math teacher's like mirroring common language and like pushing for scholarly terms just like everybody else does. Even if those scholarly terms are in another language, like I push them to use addition instead of plus and things like that. Adición no más, like that sort of thing. So.
Okay. Other thoughts on sort of in these videos of the common language, the development of mathematical ideas, or the development of the contextual features?
One thing I noticed after I watched it again last night after kind of incorrectly commenting on Kanushi's post, when she went around, the teacher went around, a lot of kids, when they're trying to prove that x to the 0 or 4 to the 0, 4 raised to the 0 power is 1. Like, because a lot of students will say, oh, well, 4 times 0 is 0. So I think sometimes like talking about it precisely helps students kind of separate the concept as well. Because although many students might have been able to create the rule, a lot of them still were thinking of it as 4 times 0 or x times 0. So like if you can, because it's a big difference, and like it's being precise like that is difficult, but it has two very different concepts in math. So maybe I guess if she was a little more precise with that at the beginning, like students would have maybe been able to separate the concepts a little more.
What did there was some comments on checking for understanding, and the way that sort of the lack of checking for understanding in the quadrilateral video, as well as the way that the teacher in the exponent video checked for understanding of these things that she was developing. Could someone with thoughts on that share your reflections on what you saw in the videos, as well as how you think one effectively develops these things and make sure that the students understand what you're talking about?
I thought the exponent video, maybe I might be remembering this wrong, but I thought the exponent video didn't do a good job with checking for understanding. I know she did a lot of like class call outs for answers to like see like if we're ready to move on, like 2 raised to the 2nd power is, like 2 raised to the 3rd power is, and then but like some students would yell out like 6, or some students would yell out the wrong answer, and I think she would just like hear the right answer and like maybe call on that student to repeat the right answer instead of allowing like a student who thinks it's one way and a student who thinks it's the other, like debate which one's right, and like they actually come to that like realization of what 2 raised to the third power is in discussion. So I thought that like call and response tactic for a check for understanding, she did that a lot. Like she did that, but it didn't allow for like students who don't really understand it to realize what mistake they're making or realize what they're doing wrong. I don't remember as well the quadrilateral video, what she did for checking for understanding, but I do remember that from the exponent video.
Responses to that, either to sort of agree and elaborate or expand on that? No, I'm going to pick on you. I haven't heard from you yet. What were your thoughts on sort of the checking for understanding? Did you see the same thing that Jacob did? Did you see something different? How does this reflect how you either do this or like to do it in your class?
You said checks for understanding.
Sort of the way that the instructor, after explaining something to develop these key mathematical ideas, the way she then checked to see that the students were getting it, see whether they understood what she was talking about or not.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Stop.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was all right. I mean, the way that I check for understanding, a lot of times I'll use like blind votes, more or less. Like I'll have kids like put their heads on their desk and just like thumbs up if you get it to the side or down. I'll also cold call, or I'll have kids like repeat what I say or what other kids say. No, I'm sorry. What was Jake's main point about that?
Jacob, you want to say that again?
Yeah, sure. I thought in the exponent video, she would do a lot of call and response, not call and response, but like kind of asking a class to the question, posing a class to the question. And she would take out student call outs as a form of like student response. So she would say things like, okay, so we have 2 raised to the second power is, and then kids would yell 4. And like all kids yelled 4. And then she would put 2 to the 6th power, 2 to the 3rd power is, and then most of the kids said 8. Some of the kids said 6. And she's like, yes, 8, and then she would go on to the next one. And I remember seeing it a few different times where this like kind of rhetorical, but not rhetorical, just posing a question to the class and having them yell out an answer when there's like dissenting opinion among the students didn't allow for the students who got the question wrong to understand why they were wrong or discuss that thought out. And so like it didn't seem like a good check for understanding to me.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think that take a check for understanding.
Noah, you're not coming through very clearly at all.
Okay. Yeah, so I definitely agree with Jake's idea that like if it's a question that is up for debate, that's probably not the best tactic. But for example, like I'll definitely use that tactic if it's something that like is a math fact that we've talked about, or if I'm like reviewing something that everybody should know. If it's something that I think there's going to be disagreement on, I won't do that, and I'll definitely open it up for like a discussion. But I mean, I definitely think call and response can be good because it gets everybody involved as opposed to cold calling kids or calling on kids, because a lot of kids don't have the confidence to just speak in class. Like I have a bunch of kids who are like, Mister, like, please don't call on me, or like, please don't make me read, or please don't make me say something. So it's like, if I do that call and response, then everybody talks and like feels more involved in class, because I just have some kids who like I've got great relationships with, but it's just like they're just so shy because there is like a decent amount of bullying at my school and stuff like that. So it's just like a lot of kids don't want to get involved in the class discussion. So like I see that sometimes as a way to get everybody more involved.
Kanusha, Sally, Patrick, do you guys have thoughts on this? How do you deal with checking for understanding, especially in a situation where you may have kids who are hesitant to respond?
I'm a big fan of cold calling, just left and right. And like sometimes, yeah, like I remember when they taught me cold call, they taught it differently to me than the way I do it sometimes, which is where you don't call on a kid that you know isn't with it. Like occasionally I do, just to like get them pay attention, man, this is important. But then eventually like I'll bounce it to but then after that, like I bounce it to a student that like is with it, then I bounce it back to that kid that didn't get it originally. So that's it. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a fan of oral response for that too, which is kind of, I think what that teacher was talking about with Jake, that was talking about the exponent teacher. I think that he's like 100% on when he says that when you hear a choral response where like there's a common mistake, you hear like that class split between those two things. Like I think that that's something you should totally address then and there. Interesting. I hear 6. I hear 8 for 2 to the power of 3. Which one is correct and why? But yeah, those are that I like.
Hello.
Yeah.
So one thing that we were learning last year at my school was warm calling, because we would have like cold calls and kids would be like, I'm not doing it. And then you're just like, oh, okay, great. let's just try. And then they're like, no, I'm not. And so I've been doing a lot more warm calling this year, especially in my 8th grade class where there's a lot of social risk, where participating and doing the right thing in the classroom is seen as a bad thing. And so when you're warm calling, you know, you're like, oh, that they have more confidence in that. So that's what I've been trying to do now in my 8th grade classes, warm calling.
So tell us about what you mean when you say warm calling.
So students are working on like a problem on their own, typically, or maybe in a group, but I've been doing it when we're doing independent work. I will circulate in the room and just like see what I'm like down. And then if a student has an interesting answer on their paper, not necessarily correct, but just like an interesting answer, and they have like, they show their work, I'll be like, oh, this is some good work. I want you to share this with class. And then I will bring the class back together and be like, oh, like this person had a, and that's what we do. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, we're gonna say.
No, please.
I guess one thing, and it's not always successful, but like a lot of I just try to focus on the messaging in class. Like wrong answers get A's too in class. Like it just stuff like that, or like, oh, this person made like an A+ mistake. Like you did a great job, and like you're getting an A+ for whatever for the class, like whatever grade I get, and then but just like kind of like the positivity and like focusing on like the process, not necessarily the answer. And similar to that, I kind of like I have like my my seats are like the quadrant 1 of the Cartesian plane, and I have like note cards with like the different ordered pairs on there. So like you pull out, oh, if you're in seat 2-2, like it's kind of like random calling. But what I do is I just sometimes don't show them the card, and I just say whoever I want to call on, I just say that ordered pair. Like I pretend like I pick it and just say, oh, 4-3. Oh, look, that's Wolfris. And so they think it's random, but it's not always random. So it it helps sometimes. Or if a kid doesn't answer, and again, like this is I struggle with this all the time, but like, oh, well, I'll come back to you, and then we'll see whether you agree or disagree with what the next person says. So they're not completely off the hook, but if they're really stuck, they'll just have to respond to what the next person says.
You guys you've raised a lot of sort of crucial points and important questions here. I mean, I think the first one that Jacob has raised is the vital point of how we correct misconceptions, and that the whole purpose of discussing these key mathematical ideas and developing the common language is making sure everybody's there. And that when we simply throw out the right answer, or we don't accomplish what we're looking for. So the first question is thinking about, what can we do to make sure that those who don't get it, and how can we focus on the process a little more. And of course, one way to doing it is publicly, is sort of talking to the individuals and having, if we've got people who are brave enough to be wrong, or we've created that norm in the classroom where you can be wrong, to have to do that publicly is ideal. And I think it's something that we all want to strive for in our classrooms, but we have to be realistic as to where we are at the time. And like Noah was saying, if you've got kids who are paying a social price, we don't necessarily want to force them to pay that price, but the question then becomes how do we change the culture of the classroom, and how do we change the mindset? And that's not an easy thing. And but I think also, so thinking of creative ways to surface student thinking, and we don't only have to choose between choral response and individual students. If you can have everybody write stuff down and hold it up. And one of the most valuable tools I had in my classroom was individual whiteboards. And so if I had a quick question that I wanted to check understanding on, I could throw it out there and have everybody write on their whiteboard and just hold it up. And then I had a very quick picture of who got it, who didn't, with very little risk.
Yeah, I do that too.
So it's figuring out how can we correct those misconceptions, and how can we surface get an idea of where they are, and then how can we correct them is crucial. And I think you guys, one of the issues in that first one is she skated right by a lot of that stuff, so that some of those kids who had the misconception, she may have heard it, but she didn't really necessarily get there. All right. Yeah, and I think the question of cold calling is definitely. I mean, we want to be in a place where we can call on anybody. And Patrick, I like your idea of pretending to be random and grabbing some kids. I think that's great. But we have to recognize when kids are not ready for that. And sometimes we got kids for whom calling them out and embarrassing them will be tough. And I think the challenge and take us backwards. In other words, and I think the challenge becomes, how do you address that individually with kids and say, I might respect that for the moment, but part of the goal of this is for you to be able to do this, and figuring out how you can work with them to get there, whether it's having a few times where you let them know they're going to call and give them a chance to prepare, or having them do, I don't remember whether it was in this group, where if you have a kid who, like, you let them sort of do the silent thumbs up when they want to be called on, so you can get them the experience of talking in front of the class when they're ready. But letting them know that by the end of this year, you need to, by a month from now, or even 2 weeks from now, you need to be ready to be called on, and let's talk about how to get there so that we can create an atmosphere where everybody can make mistakes. But it's a process. I mean, it's something that we of course have to work for. All right. let's see. There are a couple other things that we could have talked about, but we spent more time on that than I had planned. I want to skip to one other thing about these launches. And that's the question of getting students engaged in the central question of the lesson. It wasn't in the article. And so in people's comments, a lot of people didn't really address that. And I get that. I mean, I've sort of tacked this on the end. It's easy. But as you think back on these two videos, I'd love to hear some thoughts on to what extent do you feel like the teachers got students engaged and interested in the central. Well, actually, let's go back first. What would you say the central question of the quadrilateral video was? Kind of a volunteer to sort of, let's get that out on the table.
Wasn't the quadrilateral video, it was like about a kite, and they had to like figure out like something with the production, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I remember that much. And she presented it as like, she was like, oh, it's like task is going to take us a couple of days because we have to action, but I'm not going to lie, it's like I don't fully remember.
It may be. Most of you guys watched this a few days ago. You may. Does anybody remember what about the production of the kite they were trying to figure out?
The poles, the diagonals, right?
Oh yeah, she was like holding it and like showing how it could be different. Yeah.
Sally, you glitched out on us there. Can you say that again?
Wasn't it? She was like showing how like if this is like if the like Nusri was saying like if poles were different, you would then have like different side lengths, or it would be like a different version of a kite or something. Because she had like her examples with the sticks, and then she was like moving them.
So the question she was asking is, how does the relationship, how do these sticks impact the shape of the kite? So we want to be, if somebody orders a certain shape, we want to be able to know exactly what kinds of sticks we need to order. So so your task is to figure out how the relationship of these sticks and the kite relates to the shape. So what did she do or did she not do? Well, and let's put that aside. So what would you say is the central question of the exponent lesson?
I mean, she brought out a lot of, like, she brought out the squares, the cubes to show exponential growth. She plotted it on a graph. It seemed like it was like an introductory lesson. What are exponents? It seemed like that was the question. I might be wrong, but it, like, just by the way she like was talking about it and displaying so many things, it seemed like it was like an introductory lesson. So like, could the central question have been like, what is an exponent, maybe?
What do you guys think? What do you remember? Would you agree that it was just what is exponents? Was that the central question? Did you see a different central question?
Yeah, like what is an exponent? Well, I don't know. I don't know. What does exponential growth look like? I don't know, but it seemed like an introductory lesson to exponents to me.
Tanisha, you were nodding. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I was just thinking like she was like hinting at the exponential growth thing with the graph. I feel like the kids knew the concept of an exponent, like they knew they had to multiply it out. So I feel like if you give them 2 to the power of 6, like 6, they would know how to do that. So maybe not like quite introductory on exponents, but maybe on like exponential growth. Maybe that's where she was heading. I don't know.
And I would argue that I think one of the reasons you're having trouble remembering this one, I think it's easier. It's hard to remember the quadrilateral one because it was kind of a complicated question. I think with a problem with the exponent lesson is there was no central overarching question. I mean, and I think saying something's an introduction, what are exponents? That's not a great overarching question for a lesson. I mean, for a lesson, it's a little broad. And so if, that's what she was doing in that first part of that lesson. And then she was having them sort of figure out, okay, what are these rules? But they weren't really connected to anything. So I guess I'm sort of jumping in here and giving my opinion earlier than I planned, but there was no sort of effort to create a question in the kid's mind that then they got to answer. I mean, she had a lot of little questions, which is what's the pattern here? What's the pattern here? What's the pattern here? But there was no real effort to get the kids engaged in that. And I think that's a key, and I think we saw a little bit of that in the kite video, but not a ton either. She just really said, here's the question, go. So one question I'd like to throw out to you guys is, given these two, so let's take in the exponent. I think a good part of that lesson was trying to develop the rules of exponents. The central question of a lesson is, say, to try to get kids interested in the rules of exponents, or a central question is this kite question of how might the sticks impact the shape. What might you do to get kids invested? Any have suggestions or ideas for how you would do that in either of these lessons? Or argue that it happened. If you really think it happened in one of these lessons, explain how you think it did.
Wait, so you're asking how can we get students more engaged?
How would you, given if the central question, what would you do if you were the teacher? How could you structure a launch to get kids interested in one of these two central questions of these lessons?
I know in illustrative math curriculum that we're using at our school, we use a lot. We're trying to use like more like give students the stuff to play with and like see what's happening, how you could change the shape. I feel like if students are able to like play with that themselves and determine that by themselves, and then it would be a lot more exciting. Because we do a lot of that in our curriculum where it's like, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And you just give it to them. They just play with it. And then they're like, oh, like it changes in shape. So maybe like give them stuff to like play around with.
Thoughts on that? Either sort of adding on the experience with that, or just general responses to the idea of playing around as a way of getting kids interested in a question?
I think it's a really good idea. In the exponent lesson, when she was showing them those like snap cubes and like showing exponential growth, potentially having students like make that would be like a way to like, okay, we're sort of playing with blocks, but we're also representing what exponential growth looks like. And then maybe they reflect on how the growth is different from like a linear growth, and then maybe they show that. So like having like manipulatives certainly does increase engagement. Like the worry is management in some situations, but she seemed like she had the classroom to be able to like have students, if she had the materials, to let them show that. But like a way to get kids, I think like a way to get kids involved is either having them work with something like manipulatives, or what she did. She had she did have manipulatives that she was showing them. Sometimes in class, like Sally and I have taught a lesson where we have to do the cups with, the lesson called for us to give them all, water and Kool-Aid powder, and we're looking at ratios, but we instead did that on the doc cam and just showed them. I saw an increased engagement in that class because it was just different from like me on the doc cam and then they're like doing their work. It's like, oh, he has like cups and water and he's doing something. So like adding having like physical items in the room that you can like cite to. I think like the kite, I was about to call her kite lady. The quadrilateral lesson could have been if she maybe had like if she had like a kite she could bring in, maybe like just something new to show. Kind of changes the like routine of the day. It's like, oh, okay, she brought in a kite. Wow, okay. Thanks.
Other thoughts on the idea of open-ended exploration as a way of involving students?
Yeah, that's one thing I thought you could maybe do a little more in the exponents. I guess it is kind of tough. You can probably take the mathematical view of, well, what is the value of exponents? Why do we have them? Just like I think all kids would say multiplication is pretty valuable because it's instead of if it's 7 times 8, we don't want to have to add 8 7 times. We can just multiply it. But exponents is just like repeated multiplication. So I think if you can make that connection, and then a little bit you could connect it to like exponential growth of an infectious disease, or if you want to be a little more positive, like of bank of like a account with interest or something. That might not be. That wouldn't really be exponential, or you could make it, but I don't know like why you would do 2 cubed to the 4th power. I don't know how you would do that to real life. I'm trying to think. Like if you had 2 cubed to the 4th, it'd be 2 to the 12th, but I don't know how to connect it. So I guess like you could try to like the purely mathematical or real life, and then with the open exploration, like let them try to figure out like why exponents are useful. So maybe give them the rule and they have to prove why. I don't know. I struggle with that too, teaching it the same kind of lesson.
Other thoughts? I think these are good points. I think open-ended exploration can draw students in. The key, I think, to open-ended exploration, if you're starting a lesson that way, is you have to make sure that at some point you boil it down to a question. And the great thing about open-ended exploration is that question can come from the students. So in exploring, they may ask that question, or you can kind of guide them to that question. And suddenly it's a question that comes from them, and they'll have they can have a more investment in getting the answer. I think real world connections, I think definitely if we can see a way that they can see a way that this actually connects to real life. But again, we have to make sure that it's authentic. So I, especially early on, spent a lot of time trying to make real world connections, had tenuous ones, and found that often they were manufactured often works in the opposite direction. And I actually think that when we have something that we also, I think real world connections can really help, but we also can't be afraid to get kids that know that we can get kids excited about mathematics questions if we frame them the right way. And especially, I think, if we get them to make some predictions. So I think one way that I might have approached this idea of rules of exponents is to just put up x to the third times, or 4 to the third times 4 to the fifth equals 4 to the question mark. And have them give them like 10 seconds or 30 seconds to think about it, get some ideas, and then hopefully we'll get a few different answers, and then let them explore. So that they have a prediction, they have who's right, who's wrong, that kind of getting ideas out there initially, and especially if students are willing to put their names on it, so then they're interested. All right, let's find out which one's right. Let's go explore. Are ways of getting them to get interested. The key, though, I think, is making the question clear. And I think what we saw in the quadrilateral video, her question was clear. We knew what the overarching question was of this lesson. How do the sticks predict the shape? Any student can say that. Whereas in that exponent video, we weren't clear what the question was. There was a lot of little things going on, and a lot of disconnected explorations without a big sort of what's the bigger question going on here. So I think being clear, I guess the point I want to make here is when you do a launch, be really clear make sure the students are clear about what the question is that they are trying to answer. Because if sometimes we can do too much open-ended exploration without a question, and then it can kind of peter out. All right, so that's my moral is think about, make sure you know what your overarching question is, so that you can keep that, so that they can be focused on it, and they can and hopefully you can figure out a way to get them invested in answering it. All right. Closing comments, objections. If I pontificate like this, feel free to say I disagree or to ask a question, because I did this for a while, but not everything I say is always right for every situation. So thoughts, requests for clarification, disagreement. Okay. Then I want to look ahead a bit. The reading you're doing this week, we're going to start digging in. This 5 Practices book fleshes out a lot of what, when we talk about a launch, an exploration, and discussion as a way of structuring a lesson. His 5 Practices fleshes out ways of thinking about doing that in the exploration and the discussion. And the 2 parts that you'll be reading about this week, you're going to read a chapter that gives one more fleshed out overview of what these 5 practices are. And then it's going to zoom in on anticipating and monitoring. And I mean, what I was going to do, but we're not going to take the time for. How are we going to take time? Yeah, let's do this. Let's change the guide. What do we have? 2, 4. We got 5 of us. I'm gonna just I want to do a quick pair and then share about this question of why if we're doing a task, why think ahead? Why anticipate how students might respond to it? And what I'm going to do is I'll put you in a room of 2 and a room of 3 to come up with a few answers to this question. We'll just do about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll come back together and have you guys share. Let's start with Kanushree, Sally, Patrick, or actually, Noah, why don't you share what you tell us a few things that you and Jacob came up with for why we even bother to anticipate what students are going to do.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was talking about was like the tempo of my lesson, and how like if I get hung up on something that took me by surprise, because like a lot of times if a student says something surprising to me, like it'll stall my lesson. And like like I said, my lesson is like tempo is just so important. Keep things moving. Make sure kids like aren't losing focus or like losing engagement, which is very difficult with 7th graders. So like tempo is so important. So if I can anticipate what students are gonna say, then it's less likely that I get hung up on a response or a misconception that I don't know how to deal with. And it just keeps my lesson flowing. So like that's why it's really important for me to anticipate student responses.
All right, Jacob, what else did you guys come up with?
When we were talking a little bit about misconceptions and the importance of identifying them, and you only really do that when you anticipate their responses. So like going through thinking about what a student would look at this, what the potential pitfalls might be, and something that I like to do is like either if I find a student making that pitfall, or I'll like plan for it. So I'll like have like an extra copy of the classwork or the problem that we're on, and I'll make the mistake and then just put it on the board. And I'll start with saying like, okay, what do we think of like take 30 seconds, just look at what I've done on the board. Not telling them it's wrong or it's right. And then having them tell me one thing that they like about it, one thing that they would do differently. Just showing them one way of thinking about it that like highlights that misconception. That's only reached when you anticipate like a student response to a question, is like being able to show them what a misconception is and then them being able to talk about it.
All right. Patrick, can you share with us something that you guys came up with, or that's different from what? Did you agree? Did you identify these things? Did you all have something to add?
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that's a great idea that Jacob had. Is kind of like I can cheat on the cold calls. You can cheat on like finding those good mistakes too, I guess. So thanks for the idea. And yeah, I think what Sally also said, the way she put it, is to help her internalize the lesson, which I think just also helps, like putting yourself in this, like thinking through what your students are going to be doing. It's just a helpful activity anyways, because it's easy for us to kind of gloss over like what, like the actual thought process they need to have. It's, if you're more experienced, so like sometimes that turns into, oh, this is just 2 or 3 steps, when really it's like 7 or 8 things that they have to process in their head. So it helps you think about where they might go wrong. And then the other thing we said, it will help, as Jake kind of alluded to, like springboard into a discussion by finding something interesting to talk about. And because you don't have time to kind of, you got to know what you're looking for, because there's a million things going on. Like, as we said, classes are not necessarily always stable.
Sally or Kanushree, do you have something else that you all brought up? So we pretty much covered it? Okay. One crucial thing that the book is also going to talk about, but that I think is worth just bringing up now, so you can be watching for it, so you understand, because I think it helps understand what the power is of this idea of the 5 practices. It relates to number 4, but also helps you prepare to sequence your discussion. So as you monitor, you're going to be looking for who had which responses. And if you have anticipated, most of the responses will be ones you're expecting. And you've thought ahead about, all right, what's going to be the best way for me to draw on students to bring these up in the discussion to make this discussion go in a way that's gonna be most effective. So that's just that's just a fifth purpose of anticipating is preparing the sequence. And what you're going to read this week is a rich, sort of a very deep description of a guy, Nick Bannister, and what he did in a class, how he anticipated, and how he monitored. And then this will be drawn out in future weeks to look at sort of how he sequenced what he found. And I think it's something that I know I didn't think very deeply about before I sort of read this book and started kind of thinking about this way of doing things. So that's what's to come, and I think you'll find it helpful and interesting. What I planned to do was actually take Nick Bannister's task and have us do a little anticipating. I think in the 10 minutes we have, we can't get deep enough in it to make it worthwhile. So I think we won't do that. I'm going to go ahead and just talk about the homework. So this week, you're reading chapters 3 and 4 of 5 practices. Chapter 3 is another deeper overview of the 5 practices. Chapter 4 is anticipating and monitoring. By Monday morning, have your videos up so that everybody has time to look at them and give you feedback. And there will be time for you and your partners to talk further. So the feedback that you give each other on the discussion post will be sort of a beginning of that discussion. Then there's a reading response as well. Oh, right. Okay. So that's right. We got 2. Sorry. So 2 will be to take your task for TE number 2 and anticipate responses. So you do that with your task. Those of you who are using the same task for TE1 and TE2 will have a much easier time of it because you will have just taught that task and you can talk about what they came up with and sort of reprocess that. For those of you that are using a different task, this is a chance to dig in and think ahead. I'll be asking you to weigh in on your partner's thoughts. So after Monday, look back at their task and see if you have something to add. Is there something to anticipate that they didn't think about? And then 5.3 is the reading reflection. It's just a question about the reading. I'm not, just because you guys have so much happening this week, I'm not going to have you, I'm going to have you reflect for yourselves, but not have you actually go. You're not going to have to read each other's reflections because I think you just got enough going on. Questions about the coming week? All right. I look forward to seeing these launches. Oh, one more thing. When I evaluate these and give you feedback, I'm just going to be looking at the launch. So that's like, should be anywhere from like 2 to 7 or 8 minutes. So that's all you have to record. If you would like to record the rest of the lesson, feel free. It's always interesting for me to see where things went after your launch. But you don't have to. So if the recording is a pain, And it's especially if you feel like it's interfering, just stop it after the launch. But if you can't keep going, do. It's sort of nice to have that. That's my last comment. So now, any other questions? All right. Have a good week. I will have this posted. I'll get that up tonight. And I'll see you all. Good luck with the teaching experiences. I'll see you all next week.